Pressure point! All right, welcome everybody to episode 24 of the Pressure Point podcast. I've got Marcus here with me, joining me once again. Marcus, how you going?
G'day, Quinn. I'm good, mate. How are you?
Oh, not too bad. Getting by. We're in another festival of footy, so I'm enjoying my time watching
That's
that.
it. It's a good time to be alive, isn't it?
Exactly right. No, that's your favourite sayings. Today with us, we have a special guest with us today. Freelance commentator, broadcaster, journo, done work with SEN, AFL Nation, cricket.com.au, Football Nation. The list goes on. I did copy all that from your Twitter page, but Darren Parkin, thanks for joining us.
Thanks. I should update that a little bit, but yeah, most of that's still current. But yeah, good to be here, and nice to hear from both of you. And yeah, the festival of footy is great. I think we had Monday off, and that's about it. But yeah, good to roll on through, and we won't know what it's like next year if we go back to 6 and 7 days between games.
It's going to be very different next year, I think. We've all gotten quite used to this, but you said the Twitter wasn't exactly up to scratch. Why don't you give us a background of yourself? Like, where did your career with sports media begin, and what inspired you to get into the industry?
I guess it's actually not too far off the mark, but yeah. So I studied journalism at Monash Uni back in started 2004. So finished high school in 2003. I was at Monash through from 2004 to 2007. So I, like most people, played football as a junior and wanted to be involved in that. I guess you reach a point where you realise you're not going to play AFL, so you're trying to find a way. And my passion was always to stay involved as much as I could. I used to do stats at home, watching Friday night games. I used to do, pretend radio calls. I remember listening to Rex Hunt call the 1993 preliminary final between Essendon and Adelaide for 3AW, and at that point, it was something I was pretty passionate about doing. Just studied normal journalism. I didn't do radio or sports journalism specifically, just a normal journalism degree at uni. Did a bit of work with the ANZ Bank, just doing some online journalism for them, and towards the end of my studies, and then did voluntary stuff at Casey Radio in Cranbourne, which was hosting a sports show on a Sunday and calling the VFL for them when they had the rights. And then, just kept sort of emailing SEN. I didn't know a lot about them growing up in the country. I hadn't listened to them that much because I wasn't in Melbourne. So I sort of kept trying to arrange meetings with them, caught up with the program director, then didn't hear from him for quite a few months, kept sort of emailing him for follow-ups. And then one day he sent me an ad for the overnights radio host on SEN saying I should have a go at that. It was run by a company called Croc Media. They are now the same thing as SEN. They weren't at the time. So Croc Media owned the time slot of overnights. And so I applied for that role, got down to the last two and just missed out, but got offered the role of being a producer. So I produced that show for about a year and then became host of it. And then Croc Media expanded into things like AFL and soccer and other stuff, and more of a partnership with SEN. And that all grew from there. I started calling AFL in 2011, started calling the A-League in 2014. I've been with the cricket guys for 4 or 5 years. So yeah, that's sort of my main passion, is the play-by-play stuff. And it's been good to sort of develop that.
Yeah, you've got quite an extensive history there. And I think, as you said earlier, I've got a similar sort of reason for trying to do this sports media thing and get into it. I think I realised quite early that playing AFL wasn't going to be my thing, and I think from there, for me, the next best was definitely calling it and being involved with it all. Like you said, there's a lot that you've done and tried to get into and all that. What do you think the most difficult hurdle for you so far in your career has been?
Probably, for me, a lot of it's been more recent. I mean, the start of it was, and it's a case of knocking on the right doors and things like that. Obviously, you've got to have a skill set, but you've sort of got to be a bit lucky too, sort of right place, right time. And certainly that perseverance can't be sort of understated, how you just sort of keep knocking on doors and keep doing, jobs like hosting overnights, jobs that are difficult, where you might not earn a lot and the hours are tough, but knowing what might sort of happen at the end. But I guess for me, that the biggest challenge has probably come lately with how the media industry has condensed itself a little bit. So it used to be quite broad. You would have had maybe more radio stations, more callers. Now it's a lot of one call done from a studio will cater to 3 or 4 different networks. And even now with, radio stations merging together and partnerships like that, it might have come from where there were, say, 30 calling opportunities in a weekend, hypothetically, to 15 or 16. So that, for me, has probably been the being a freelancer and being, I guess, a jack of all trades, master of none. It's been difficult when it's all been condensed like that to I guess still get all of the opportunities that you want. So still getting there, but obviously not quite to the same extent. So for me, it's the challenges now of trying to obviously create those opportunities when there are less of them.
Yeah, perfect. Well, in regards to the biggest influence in your career to date, who do you think that's been, and who have you learnt the most from in your time working in the industry?
Probably, I guess, 3 layers of it. One that people may or may not be familiar with is a guy by the name of Christian Argenti. So he used to host the Overnights program on SEN. Actually, funnily enough, for those who might not be familiar, he was the lead singer of the band in Vertigo, if people remember them from the late 90s, early 2000s. It had a couple of hits. He then went into radio after that. And has recently been hosting stuff in Queensland, but he was my first host that I produced for when I was 22 or 23, and he taught me a lot about things like delivery, about what is and isn't newsworthy, how to read what is good radio content, and things like that. So he's been a huge mentor over the years. In a footballing sense, it has been. It's funny enough, I say Rex Hunt, even though I'm not the same type of caller as he is. He's clearly an exuberant, I guess, more in terms of the fun and the humour and the nicknames and that sort of stuff. And whereas I'd be more of your maybe ABC type caller, a bit like, say, a Dan Lonigan that I know you're familiar with, or try to call in the style of someone like Gerard Whateley rather than being that more exuberant type. But yeah, he was huge. As I said, when I was 8 years old, he became the reason I wanted to do it. And then I've had the chance to call 10 or 12 games with him around the 2012, 13, 14 period. So he was a big influence on me in that regard. And another one would certainly be Peter Donegan, who's probably more of that style of calling, but his versatility. So always heard the stories about how he was at the London Olympics in 2012 calling Usain Bolt winning a gold medal, and then was in his hotel room that night studying VFL notes, not AFL, but VFL, because he was flying home the next day and had a VFL game maybe 2 or 3 days later. And I think that you called the biggest sporting event in the world, and then you're calling state football a couple of days later, and he prepared for both of them the same way. And we once rattled off a sport for every letter of the alphabet that he'd called somewhere along the line, and we were actually able to find one. So just talking to him about that ability to be versatile, but also constantly preparing, that they'd probably be the 3.
Yeah, right. Now, growing on that, you might have some of the same answers, but who do you think your favourite person to work with has been so far?
My favourite person to work with is probably Terry Wallace, actually. His knowledge base on the game is extraordinary, and he's probably the first, I guess, full-time AFL person that I worked with regularly, and it was just after his coaching stint finished at Richmond, and it kind of opened my eyes a little bit to that too, that even to this day, I've never met somebody that understands the game as well as he does, and it opens your eyes into even to the coaching landscape, where you might have all of that knowledge base and there's different layers of a club that make them work or make them not work. But his ability to, just read games and he could sort of tell 15 minutes in, saying if the Western Bulldogs don't address A, B and C, they'll lose. And he'll pinpoint exactly what the 2 or 3 things are and exactly how a side can win or lose games and pick it apart. So he's always been great fun. He's a terrific fella as well. So on top of those guys mentioned before, I've had a lot of fun with Plough over the years.
Yeah, Terry's football brain is unbelievable sometimes. The things that he comes up with, I don't know how he pulls it out, but he does. He's a terrific man. What's your view on the current shape of the AFL at the moment? I know there's a lot of debate between people saying the quality's not as good or it's better. What do you think personally?
I think they can get into trouble sometimes chasing their own tail, where they might identify something that has tactically changed in the game over a year or two period, and they'll try to combat it with a rule change, and then that creates another problem. So then they either reverse the rule change or create another one to try to counteract that. For example, the congestion. They thought, well, if we pay holding the ball less often and encourage players to just knock the ball out, it doesn't matter if it's thrown or dropped or spilt out, then that might encourage more movement. But then that gets people more frustrated. You get coaches sort of saying, well, that used to be holding the ball, it isn't anymore. What are we supposed to teach our players? And they balance it back the other way. So probably just the fact that they don't necessarily trust the product as much as they should. I mean, you look at a sport like soccer, which I think has had 2 major rule changes in 120 years or something like that. I know it's a different game, but there's not a lot wrong with the AFL. I think you can watch a lot of games from the 80s and 90s, and people say, oh, that was the great era. There's some pretty bad games played back then, and even in the 80s, there were a lot of games that weren't televised or even on radio. So there'd be some poor games you just never see. So I don't think it's necessarily in that bad a shape, and the fundamentals are still the same, and everything that we're looking to achieve is still the same, but probably just letting it breathe a little bit. You don't always have to jump on top of it and stamp something out, because generally it might be tactical. It might just be something the best team in the comp's doing, and therefore the opposition are trying to counteract that, which is like, for example, when Sydney and West Coast were good in 05 and 06, the game was played very differently to when Geelong, Hawthorn, St Kilda, Collingwood, etc. were good in the 08, 9, 10, 11 period. So I just think they've just got to let it sort itself out a bit sometimes.
Yeah, I think the constant rule changes are definitely confusing for players and viewers such as ourselves. It can be a bit much to take in. But now I have heard that you're a big Saints supporter. Obviously, the Saints have had a lot of close games this year and whatnot, and sitting in the 8 at the moment. Are you optimistic about the Saints heading into the finals?
Yeah, they've obviously still got to secure the spot. There's a bit of work to do. I mean, the last 2 games, either one of those victories would have secured the spot. The Brisbane loss, they were probably outplayed for most of that game, but found a way to hang in there and then nearly pinched it. The Melbourne game, they were quite wasteful. They missed a lot of shots and butchered the ball going forward. So that was more frustrating of the 2. They've got Hawthorn, West Coast and GWS to come. They need to win at least 1, possibly 2. So they played well enough to be dangerous if they get in. They're not at the level where they can sort of win a flag or challenge for top 4 just yet, but they certainly, I would think, have done enough to deserve to play finals. But obviously that can change if they fail in the next 3 weeks, and obviously you lose that right to do so. But they probably earned the right to finish the job, but they've still got to finish the job. So, yeah, it'd be nice to get them back in there.
As a Richmond supporter, I'm pretty upset with the fact that we let Dan Butler go, and seeing the things that he's been doing with the Saints. You must be pretty stoked with how he's gone this year.
Yeah, he's been terrific. Probably he and Jack Steele have been I guess the 2 real big positives. I mean, there have been others, Hunter Clark and a few others as well, but yeah, probably Dan Butler giving them a top quality small forward who's sort of top 6 for goals, and Jack Steele becoming an elite mid have been the 2 that have carried them forward.
Well, yeah, as we all know, the news in the last 24 hours has been the Gabba getting the grand final. What are your thoughts on it? And obviously being at night as well, first time in history that's happened. What are your thoughts on the Gabba night grand final? And will you be heading up at all?
I'd love to get that opportunity to. We'll see what happens when the allocations come around for finals time. So I guess things can change very quickly in regards to quarantining and what it would mean if he came back and all of that sort of stuff. But look, the Gabba and Queensland by extension have been terrific for the competition. They've kept the comp afloat. Every single side in the competition has hubbed in Queensland at one point or another from every state. So without them, we may not have got to the finals. I agree that Western Australia and South Australia are more football states, and maybe in terms of how the public would react to that would be better in those states, and they probably deserve it because of the love they've always had for the game. But I think Queensland keeping the competition afloat, and it seems the safest bet in terms of limiting spread and without issues around quarantining. If you go to Perth, you've got to go into a 14-day quarantine. You'd have to play whilst in quarantine. So, I just think Queensland was the safer option of those, as much as South Australia and WA might sit there and think that their historical contribution to football has been higher, and they'd be right. I think given the circumstances, and I think someone raised a good point. We don't know how long the COVID thing will last. There's an outside chance we might need Queensland early next year again. So maybe then if you take the grand final away from them this year and then you turn around to the government in February or March next year and say, we need you again, they might not be as forthcoming.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they definitely deserve it for the way that they've saved the season this season. So I definitely agree with it. In terms of your advice, what would be your one piece of advice to someone who wants to be a sports journalist and get that big break into the sports media industry?
Probably just that persistence. I mean, there'll be times where the journey will feel a little bit frustrating, but it's always sort of taking you somewhere. And every job you do is a means towards an end. If it's community radio, local radio, a country newspaper, overnights, producing, pressing buttons, whatever it may be. They're all skills that are important, particularly as we said now with the streamlining. They generally want someone who's a host or a broadcaster to be able to do most things, to have that news feel, but also have some degree of technical knowledge as to what they're doing as well. So, yeah, don't ever be discouraged by if someone doesn't reply to an email, or if someone's not answering a phone call, or you apply for something and don't get it. That persistence will eventually land you somewhere. So, yeah, that'd be my advice, is that never get put off, and no road really leads to a dead end.
Yeah, I think that resonates with us a lot, considering we're obviously trying to sort of break into there, and we've had a few people not quite get back to us the way we would have hoped they would have. So it's a tough learning curve, but it's definitely one I think
it'll always happen. So.
Yeah, I think we're just going to take that ride and go with it from there. But that's all we've got for today. I really appreciate you joining us, Darren. I think your insight has been immense. The knowledge you have for not just football, but all sports as a whole is incredible. And once again, I really do appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today.
No worries. Always happy to chat. Good luck.
Thanks, Darren.
Hopefully speak to you soon.
Pressure point! Pressure point! Pressure point! Pressure right! Pressure right!